We are live on YouTube. Chair Clark, if you'd like to open the meeting, we're live on YouTube.
All right, I will call to order the City of DuPont Tree Advisory Commission meeting for Monday, November 10th at 5:03 p.m. And can we get a roll call, please?
Commissioner Pasley,
Present.
Vice Chair Clark,
Present.
Chair King isn't online, so we need a motion to excuse her.
I motion to excuse.
A second.
Oh, I guess
And then
all.
missing something.
So we have a first and a second to approve, so motion carries.
Okay.
Commissioner Peak,
Present.
Commissioner Lindsay,
Present.
And is there any public comment for tonight's meeting?
we have one person on Zoom, Heidi. Let me see. Right. Would you like to make a comment? I don't think she wants to make a comment, so.
All right, and then can I call for an approval of tonight's agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda.
And second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Perfect. And then moving on, can we have an approval of the meeting minutes from 10:13? I just wanted to take a second to look over them.
Motion to approve the minutes from Monday, October 13th, 2025.
Second.
All right, it looks good. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right, moving on to discussion item number 6. So number 6.1, this meeting is also our Arbor Day event. And we had some questions to ask an arborist who is Commissioner Pasley. I know that we had some questions that people had already asked, and then we'll open this space for anyone that has further questions as well, along with any commissioners too, can also ask questions or staff. So we'll go ahead and open that.
Commissioner Pasley, would you mind just a brief introduction?
Yes. So my name is James Pasley. I'm on the Tree Commission. I am a board certified master arborist. I work for City of Tacoma as their permit compliance arborist, but live here in DuPont. I've worked both as a commercial arborist and as a municipal urban forester, doing most everything except for electronic seismography, which I will not take the time to explain because it's complicated. So I've done like disease work, pruning, all your run-of-the-mill tree care. And as Kelsey indicated, we got a bunch of questions from the last farmer's market where people had questions about trees. And then we also got one in the Dropbox from Heidi, who I believe is online. So I'll actually start with hers because it's on top. So Heidi asks, what is the best way to prune maple trees so that they don't get too huge? So there are a lot of maple species. Some get quite large, some get quite small. I'm assuming this is probably a Norway or a red maple because we have a lot of those here. And they get 55 feet tall, maybe 35 feet wide, and sometimes there's not enough space for that. So as far as pruning, you always do not want to top the tree. It's probably the best, most efficient way to reduce the height, but it's also severely damaging to the tree and its structure. If it does not kill the tree, it usually opens it up for a lot of insect pests and diseases. And even the way the branches grow after you've topped a tree, they're more prone to breakage. So no topping. However, with a qualified pruner, and I usually recommend an ISA certified arborist, not because they're better, but just because they have had to demonstrate their knowledge and competency to get certified. So they know how to do stuff like a reduction cut. So that's systematically taking off one of the taller branches back to, imagine like a topographic map and there's a river and it's got all these forks. You're tracing one back to the next junction, and that's where you're taking the tallest branch off. And then maybe the next year you come back and you take the next one. And that's a way to kind of slowly reduce the height of a tree without stressing it out too much. Another way is if the tree is already at a height that you like, and you don't want it to get taller, there are things called plant growth regulators that can be applied in the soil, kind of like fertilizer or water. And it uses plant hormones to redirect how the tree is spending its energy. So it takes that energy away from vertical growth and puts it into root growth or leaf growth. So like the leaves will grow thicker, which is also a great way if you have pests in your tree. That can also help deal with the pests because they can't get into the leaves. But those are plant growth regulators. Any arborist who does, they call them plant healthcare services, can provide that service. And it's not like a regulated chemical like a pesticide. So it's not harmful to the environment, and an arborist can apply it without having a special license. Whereas like a pesticide, you have to have a license with the Department of Agriculture. And then probably the best way to keep a tree from getting too huge is to, this doesn't work with a tree that already exists, but if you're going to plant a tree, look up how big it's going to get, take out your measuring tape and measure the space you have and make sure it's going to fit in your space. Yeah, that's probably the best way. But otherwise, I'd say it is worth the money to hire a certified arborist rather than paying somebody who's not certified and then having to hire a certified arborist later to come correct the mistakes. Yeah, that's that question. So then the ones we got from the farmers market and any of the other commissioners, if they want to ask clarifying questions, that would be really helpful, because I think as an arborist and what I think might be obvious might not be obvious to non-arborists. So clarifying questions are great.
All right, I have one. Just in case people don't know like what topping means, like topping, but the difference between that and like a reduction cut.
Yeah, so topping is kind of like just taking a buzz saw and picking a point at the height in the tree and just cutting everything off at the same height. They call it a heading cut, and usually visually you can recognize it in that there are no leaves left on the tree and there's large cuts on the wood of the tree, which is generally not what you want, to have large cuts, because that opens the tree up to decay. And decay in trees is bad because that's when you have big limbs come down in storms. So large, big cuts that are taking off most, if not all, of the leaves. Yeah, so that's topping. It's generally considered to be bad by arborists and foresters, but unfortunately it is kind of a common method for landscapers. For trees, shrubs are a different thing. They can tolerate that sort of stuff, most of them. So trees, bad. Shrubs, maybe. Yeah. So then we've got the rest of these questions from the last farmers market are grouped by categories. So I'm just going to go through them by category because then all the questions will be related. So the first category is Gary Oaks. Gary Oaks is one of the common names for Quercus garryana, also known as the Oregon white oak. It is a protected tree according to the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. So the first question is, how big does a Gary oak have to be protected? So one thing to clarify, the state does not regulate these as an entity. They designate it to the local municipalities to regulate this. So you're not going to get an angry letter from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife about this, but you might get one from your local municipality. Development. Development, if you're not familiar with that term, is any kind of building of houses, building of commercial things, roads, sidewalks, that kind of stuff. So how big does a Gary oak have to be protected? The recommendation from Department of Fish and Wildlife is 6 inches in diameter or larger. And the way that you're measuring that is about 4.5 feet above the ground. If you measure across the tree, if it's 6 inches or larger, then they recommend that it be regulated. If it's like a sapling or a small tree, it's not regulated. There may be some more specifics in the city of DuPont. I personally don't know them because I haven't read the code yet.
Right, in DuPont, we protect all Gary oaks from development, regardless of size.
Okay. Second question is, how do I get more information on all our trees, especially Gary oak trees? That's probably asking the tree commission. We are working on getting a better idea of what trees we have here in the city. And we don't have a tree inventory that's done yet, but we're working towards that. Yeah, sorry, that's not a better answer. How do I know if it's a Gary oak? Are they all protected? In DuPont, yes, they are. In other municipalities, it depends. But Gary oak, as far as identification, most of the oak trees you see in DuPont are going to be Gary oaks. We also have a lot of red oaks, but there's one big thing to tell those apart. Gary oak, when you look at the leaves, they have what's called lobes, like an earlobe, and sinuses. So that's the mountain and the valley that gives the oak tree its typical shape. And all white oak family trees, of which the Gary oak is a white oak. That was a weird sentence. Gary oak has rounded lobes. So it's round like your earlobe, whereas something like a red oak is going to have a pointed lobe, like the tip of a pencil. So if you have a rounded lobe oak tree in the city of DuPont, it is probably a Gary oak. There are other oaks that have rounded lobes, but I have not seen many of those planted as street trees here. The other way that you can pick them out is they have grayish grayish white bark. That's part of why it's called a white oak, is because the bark is a whole lot lighter than other trees. It's not white like a birch tree, but it's gray. And then the last thing is it growing in a native area or is it planted along the street? If it's in a native area, probably a Gary oak. If it's along the street, probably something else that was planted.
Can I add something to that?
Yes.
Just when the trees don't have leaves on them, one of my favorite ways to identify them is the branches, because at the end of the branches, they kind of look squiggly at the end, like they still keep their canopy without having their leaves almost, so you can identify them from far away that way.
Yeah, that's another thing for identifying one in the winter. Oaks do tend to hold on to some leaves. So if you see a tree that has at the end of one of its branches a few tufts of leaves still hanging on there, could be an oak. And if you want to get real tree nerdy, Gary oak's buds have rounded tips, whereas a red oak has pointed tips, same as the lobes of the leaves, but the buds on the end of the twig. It's one of my favorites.
Do Gary Oaks drop their acorns every year?
Ooh, I think that they do.
I think they do too.
I'm 90% sure that they drop every year. Some oaks drop biannually, which means every 2 years, I think. So like a California black oak, it drops acorns every 2 years. Okay, how many of each type of oak are there in the city? And then it lists a couple neighborhoods, and I'm just going to say I don't know. As far as variety, though, I have seen maybe 4 different types of oaks just walking around. I've seen red oaks, pin oaks, white oaks, maybe a swamp white oak, but I'm not certain. All right, so the next section is who do I call / who is responsible? Can I get a list of recommended pruners for my street tree? No. Unfortunately, even just here on the tree commission, we're acting as part of the city and the city can't give official recommendations for businesses. However, if you would like to find a certified arborist, there are lists of certified arborists on the internet. You can go to www.treesaregood.org. And that is actually a branch of the International Society of Arboriculture, and it lists all certified arborists, and you can search by location, and it'll show you within a certain radius just who is working there. It doesn't say whether they're good or bad. It doesn't say whether or not they have a website, but a lot of them do list their company names, and you can look them up that way. Or what I often tell people at work is I just say, Google certified arborist in DuPont, and usually you'll find certified arborists. Also, if you're looking on their website, it's usually right there at the top or at the very bottom. They'll say whether or not they're a certified arborist. How do I report pests in trees? Generally, you do not need to. However, if you suspect that you have found an invasive insect like emerald ash borer, which the state very much wants to know about, you can go to the Washington Invasive Species Council website and report that. But generally, most pests that you see are not going to be a very big concern. If it's your neighbor's tree, you could just go tell them. But generally, there's no need to report pests in trees. With maybe the exception of like a wasp nest that's in the park. In that case, I'd say probably just contact the Parks Department. Who do I contact about sidewalk lift? I believe the new policy is the abutting property owner is responsible for maintaining the sidewalk in front of their property.
Yeah, and it's actually not a new policy. It's something that has been adopted by ordinance in DuPont for quite a while. We, just as a practice have been not necessarily, it, what we tried to do, and predates me, is the city tried to go through, they had some grant money, created a special crew, a special project called the Sidewalk Team, and attempted to level all the sidewalks, and root prune the trees that were causing the lift in the different neighborhoods in DuPont to try to right the wrongs of when Northwest Landing was developed, essentially. So when that program ran out of money, then of course the crew was disbanded. And then since that time, as we know, if a tree remains, even though you've root pruned it, if it's still not in the right spot, right tree in the right spot, it's going to eventually start damaging all over again. So that's what we're seeing, and that has caused, a lot of discussion at the policy level from our leadership here. Again, the ordinance that's been adopted since, gosh, I don't remember, but it's been quite a while, is not unique to this city. As our city attorney has said, that the statute, the RCW, the Washington State statute, really has the language in it that provides for the adjacent property owner to be responsible for the sidewalk and planting strip that's directly in front of their property. The reason being for that is yes, it is public right of way. It's enjoyed by the public, but the greater benefit is that of the adjacent property owner. And that's just sort of a summary of what the attorney has been telling us, been telling leadership. That being said, we have met about, well, how do we actually, what should be done in terms of, people can't necessarily afford the work that needs to be done. So we haven't actively worked on trying to send letters or trying to get people to repair their sidewalks at this time. What we do is we spray the sidewalks with a high-vis paint so that people are aware there is a trip hazard there. We also, if a homeowner desires to fix that voluntarily, then the city will work with them on how that can happen. And that's sort of where we are at present day on that, or on, implementing that law.
I have a question about that. Do they need, if someone wants to repair the sidewalk in front of their house, do they need to get a permit?
Yeah, great question. They would work with the city to get a permit, and we also would do our best to, really streamline that permit and make it to the extent that it's whatever the city can do. We've had talk about whether or not there's opportunity for the city to participate in any way that would lower the cost of the homeowner.
I was just curious if there's other ways that you've seen to kind of aid that issue that doesn't impose on the tree, and it can kind of work around that tree. Is there like a way that the sidewalk could be built up, or like, yes.
I love talking about that stuff. Actually, just presented at the regional conference for the ISA for the Pacific Northwest on that topic. There are a fascinating number of ways that you can preserve a tree when you need to do a sidewalk repair. It does not work in all situations, so it is very situational. So I was going to add, who do I contact about sidewalk lift? If you want to discuss how to preserve your tree, you should contact me, because I love talking about that stuff. Yeah, one of the easy ways that we've been kicking around is, without getting too in-depth on sidewalk construction, you can lay a thicker gravel base and just kind of raise the sidewalk a little bit And that's generally something you can do without hiring an engineer. Any sidewalk contractor can do that. You can get into some real tricky stuff where you got to hire an engineer, and that's very expensive. And I generally don't recommend that unless it's like a specimen heritage tree that's like Mount Vernon, like a very high dollar historical site. What is one of the other ways? Raising the sidewalk. You can curve a sidewalk, but you might need to hire an engineer for that. Kind of the concerns are maintaining accessibility. So if someone were blind or handicapped, they can still use the sidewalk. So those are the major concerns when changing the sidewalk for a tree. And generally that is reviewed under a sidewalk permit. So if you come in and propose something outlandish, the city will probably say no. Unless it's still ADA compliant. Yeah, you can bridge over trees, but unless City of DuPont has a pre-approved standard plan, that's not going to work because you need an engineer for that. But that is a thing. They do it in City of Seattle.
What is that bridging it? What does that look like, bridging a tree?
So it's like you have pillars of concrete put into the ground and they're supporting the slab. So that it's actually free floating over the tree roots.
And so then with that, I'm envisioning that the whole block would need to be treated the same way. Is that right? You'd have to have it all, you couldn't just have
at
one
least
panel.
immediately by the tree. And then to maintain ADA compliance, you'd probably have to raise the rest of the sidewalk so that it's not too big of an incline too quickly. If I have a tree from a neighbor or a neighboring park leaning over my property and it needs to be trimmed, who do I contact and how do I get it done? If it is from a city property, I would say you contact the city. That does not mean that they will do it, but at least it'll be on their radar that they should take a look at it.
Yeah, I mean, if a city tree in a park or an open space is growing and growing over into private property, the private property owner has the legal right to cut anything that is coming onto their property side.
Yeah, that is true for private property. If your neighbor's tree is growing over your property line, you technically can prune, according to the state law, everything back to the property line. I would not recommend doing that for two reasons. One, you will have an enemy for life from your neighbor. It's better to talk with them about it first. And two, if you damage the tree, they could sue you for damages to their tree, which is on their property. So don't just go crazy. Try talking to your neighbor, talking to the city, and coming up with a plan that you can meet your goals without damaging the tree, which is another instance where I would say hire a certified arborist because they can coach you through that problem. And if you're really having a big argument, hire a consulting arborist who specializes in mediation. Such a thing does exist. People that specialize in solving neighbor disputes. Might be expensive, but it might be less expensive than a lawsuit. But generally, if it's on your side, you can prune it back. And if it's like small stuff, that's generally fine. Next question is, we are a neighborhood condo association. We have trees bordering on our property we would like to trim. How do we schedule an information session on city trees for our board? I would contact the city to discuss that. If it's a city-owned tree, if it's a boundary tree, so like it's part of the trunk is on your side, part of the trunk is on their side, still contact the city. Yeah, there's not much else I could say to that. Next question is, how do I get a street tree? As far as I'm aware, the city does not give away street trees at this time. So the best way to get a street tree is to go to a nursery and buy one. There are several in our area, mostly because I've been looking for some for myself. So I've been looking them up. Without recommending any, you can Google nursery near DuPont and you will get several options. There are also some like green organizations like Pierce County Conservation District, Tacoma Tree Foundation, where they do tree giveaways. Tacoma Tree Foundation might not give you a tree for here in DuPont, but they have like plant giveaway things where if you come and get it, you could probably get one. But generally, I would not buy it from Home Depot, but I would go to a nursery.
And we do have a list, an approved list of trees, varieties. You all worked on that are, look for one on that list. It's on our webpage and it talks about the planter strip. And while it's not going to be 100%, trees are going to grow, it might give you a good idea of a suitable tree to put in your planter strip.
Yeah, and the mature size of the tree is a big issue. There's a well-known saying among arborists, right tree, right space. There are no wrong trees as long as they're in the right space. So planting a Douglas fir or a giant sequoia in the planter strip, not a great idea. But there are many trees that will fit in our smaller planter strips and do great. If you want a bigger tree, maybe plant it in your front yard because it'll still shade the street, but it won't fit in the planter strip.
Did you already talk earlier, sorry I missed the first part, about the if you want it in the strip to ask the city about locating so it wasn't over water or thing, before you dig it in, because that's
We haven't,
okay.
but there is a free service that is provided by the utility company. It's called 811. You can just dial that number, or you can go online, Washington 811. It's the dig or something before you dig. I'm blocking on it. Know before you dig. It's a free utility locate service for the right of way. They'll come mark where the gas line is, where the water line is. I think they'll mark the sewer line as well, if there's telecom or power. And you very much want to do that because it is free and it is better than dying. Because if you hit an electrical line, it's bad. If you hit a gas line, it's bad. The other ones, it's not as bad, but it is very expensive. So they'll mark the utilities for you. And generally, you do not want to plant. I don't know what the city's official rule on it, but generally, it should be at least 5 feet away from a utility. Generally, and the city might have a specific rule. They might want a little more, and I just don't know what it is off the top of my head. You should also, I will list 2 trees that you should not plant in the right of way just because they are known sidewalk busters: red maple and sweet gum, American sweet gum, Chinese sweet gum. They have a lot of surface roots and they break sidewalks. So don't plant those.
I'd like to recognize that Commissioner King joined our meeting at 5:36.
Next question is similar. How do I replace a street tree that have failed to thrive? If it's small, you can probably pull it out of the ground or use a shovel because it hasn't put down many roots yet. If you can't get it out yourself, any landscaper can remove it for you. You don't need a certified arborist for that. I would still call 811 even if there's already a tree there, because sometimes they are planted on top of utilities. So if you can't dig it out safely, I would just cut it down as close to the ground as you can. And then as far as replacing, it's purchasing a tree. Do they need to file a permit for planting a tree?
If they're doing any work in the right of way, we have a real streamlined, limited disturbance permit that we just issued so that we're sure that they plant the tree and then any disruption to that planter strip is repaired when they're done.
Yeah.
So that's for the previous question as well, but also for removing the tree. I think you have to ask the city before you remove as well.
You do. I could talk a little bit about the process. We have, if someone, and we get this a lot, actually, if someone is asking to have a street tree removed in front of their house, we send, we go out and we do an assessment of that tree to determine whether or not we agree that that tree removal should be permitted. And if in fact we see that, yeah, this is one of those trees that's going to, cause terrible damage, or perhaps it's not healthy, then we, in that analysis, we let the owner or the person that wants to remove the tree know that just go ahead online, apply for the permit. We'll issue the permit, and you can do the work.
And there was I think on the same list where there's recommended trees, there's a do not plant list as well.
Then as far as permits, is a permit required to prune a tree in DuPont?
No.
Okay, so the next question, I own my home and I have a street tree I would like to prune. Do I have to ask to do that? No. And who do I ask? Well, so as far as the pruning, if you don't feel comfortable doing it yourself, I would get a certified arborist to do it.
Exactly. And so we don't regulate the pruning, but again, it comes back to if somebody kills the tree, then we would want that tree to be replaced.
And topping is not part of pruning, so I
Correct.
don't know if that question, I can't remember if that came up.
Oh, I had something to add there. So this is not a requirement. This is just general advice on like, when do I need to hire an arborist? Generally, in my industry, we say you should hire an arborist if you have to get on a ladder, if you have to use a chainsaw above your shoulders. So like up here. Or if there's just anything that you don't feel comfortable about. If it's a limb that's larger than 3 inches in diameter, you should probably call an arborist. And the reason for that is not that we don't want homeowners doing their own tree work. It's that those are the most common injuries and fatalities in tree care, is a homeowner using a chainsaw above their head or cutting a branch larger than 3 inches in diameter or up on a ladder. In fact, those are frequently fatal. And as somebody who has had close calls, even as a professional, hire an arborist. It's not worth it. Yeah, and the chainsaw above your head, chainsaws kick back frequently. And if it's above your head, it's very hard to stop it from kicking back. So I won't talk anymore about that. That's a big one. Ooh, this is a good question. So this is similar to the last question. I just bought my house on a corner lot and was waiting for someone to come care for the trees. When no one showed, I did some research and realized I am responsible for more than 6 street trees. I wish I'd been made aware sooner. How and when should we tell people this? This is something I actually deal with. This is a frequent question I get in my job. And it is something that the realtor should be talking about with you, and that you as the home buyer should be looking into. Where does your responsibility of care end and where does the city's begin? And it is frequently not discussed at all, and it creates a lot of confusion. So I'm sorry you have 6 street trees, but I'm also not sorry because you have 6 street trees. That's amazing. But it's something that should be discussed while you're buying the home. I will also make one other comment. Some people think you have to prune your trees every single year. You do not. It is an expense. It is not as big of an expense that people tend to think. Depending on the tree, and this is why it's good to have a certified arborist look at your tree, they will know how quickly your tree species grows and how frequently it needs to be pruned. If you have something like an oak tree, maybe once every 10 years. The oak trees where I grew up, we never pruned them and we never had an issue. Small, fast-growing trees like a flowering plum, maybe every other year. But talk with an arborist. It might not be as big of an expense as you think. And if you are routinely pruning your trees, even if it's once every 10 years, you're not doing very much work each time. Whereas if you just never prune them and then all of a sudden, I've got a big issue, you've actually got a lot of back maintenance that you've never been doing. So
And one more point on the diligence question, which is a very good question. So we always encourage people that are prospective home buyers to you're talking to a realtor, of course, but it also is a really good idea to call the city as part of your diligence and find out ask those questions of the city. We're happy to answer those, where, how does this work? Who takes care of these trees? This is the property I'm looking at. Even, we have people, of course, that are wondering about all kinds of things about their property. And so I do encourage people to carry that due diligence is what we call it, and go ahead and call the city planning department.
Ooh, and I'll add one more thing to that, just because I'm in the home shopping stage. So this is something I'm thinking about. The trees are not part of the home inspection. So you have a home inspector come and inspect the home. They do not inspect the trees. They're not arborists. It's not included. You can have an arborist come do it, but it's something that you would have to pay for out of pocket. And just as an arborist, I would encourage people to do that because you might have to pay a little bit, but it's good to know if there's a big hazard tree leaning over the house before you buy it. Because once you buy it, it's yours to take care of. And if you know ahead of time, maybe the previous owner will take care of it.
And yeah, I mean, this is the topic. Yeah, we're all kind of like, for me, I just recently bought a home, and that also your insurance company will take a look in the inspection if there are tree, limbs overhanging your roof or whatever, before they will insure it. You're going to have to be clearing that away. So if you're, as a prospective homeowner, looking around and you see limbs, you just be prepared that you're going to need to take care of those, or your insurance company will likely, the underwriter won't insure the house.
Yeah. Which, in case you've already had an arborist inspect it, you can present that to your insurance company. That is a whole interesting topic that we do not have time for. The role of insurance companies in trees. Next question is, do I own my street tree? I believe the answer is no. You are responsible to maintain it in City of DuPont, but is not considered your tree as far as ownership. However, it does affect your property values.
If in the previous question, somebody planted their own, do they have more rights to it, or is
No.
the name covered?
No, they have to think about the strip itself is the public right of way, and so they have placed a tree in a public right of way strip, and so that tree remains part of the public right of way and is not owned by that individual any more than the strip is.
That is consistent with, without getting too nerdy, tree and landscape appraisal. Ownership of a tree exists until it's in the ground. And then it is owned by wherever it's planted, who owns the land there, which in this case, in the right of way, it's public property. And that, I will throw in one caveat there, that changes based on the municipality and how they view it. So in some nearby municipalities, they would say, yes, you do own the tree, but here in DuPont, That is not how it is in our city code. Next question. I'm a home renter. How do I get someone to prune the street trees? First, I would say contact the owner of the house and say, hey, these trees need to be pruned, because it's their responsibility and not yours as the renter. So, and don't pay for it and say, maybe they'll reimburse me. No, they won't. So yeah, contact the owner of the house, or if you're working with a rental agency, contact them. How do I get a tree planted in front of my house if I'm a renter? Same thing, talk to the owner. That one, they will probably, if you really want a tree, they'll probably say something like, you can purchase the tree and do it. They probably won't do it for you, but they'll say, yes, you can do it. But it's situational. Talk with the owner. Fruit trees, my favorite. My husband says my fruit and nut trees attract pests like raccoons and rats. Is that true? Actually, yes. It's food. And yeah, how do I minimize it if it is? One of the biggest things is to pick up the fruit after it falls. If you're leaving it on the ground, it's going to attract pests. I don't think the nut trees do it as much, but the fruit trees, I've heard a lot about plum trees attracting rats. The other way to do it, I don't know about raccoons and rats specifically, but certain birds that like to eat your cherries, you can purchase a fake hawk and post it on your property, and that scares them away. Yeah, I mean, it's real. Crows, you can get like reflective stuff and hang it out there, and the flashing lights kind of freaks them out. But generally, keeping the ground clean of fallen fruit is going to go a long way in discouraging pests, birds and mammals. What do I do about pests in fruit and apple trees? You can apply chemicals to it yourself if you so choose. You can hire a company that can do that for you. The certified arborists that do plant health care I used to do that work. It's a lot of money in it because there's a lot of state regulations on it. I personally do not like applying pesticides, even though I've done it as a career. I would say purchase a heritage variety or a type that is resistant to disease and pests. Regular pruning for fruit trees can also help improve that stuff. And also creating a habitat where you have beneficial predator insects that eat the pests, which is a whole nother topic that I would love to talk about. How do I trim a dwarf apple tree? Because it's dwarf, you don't want to go too crazy, but generally you want to cut off all the new growth each year because apple trees grow on old wood. Also, apple trees grow like crazy, so prune them every year. And if you don't want to do it, hire somebody because it can be a lot of work.
You said the old wood, prune off the new wood?
The new wood.
Always prune off the new wood.
So the apples grow on old wood, pears grow on new growth. And don't ask me about plums or cherries because I'm still learning those. But apples, they generally grow on old wood.
And I have to ask, the best time of the year to do that would be?
Winter, January, February, even maybe not December. I'd say January, February. And you want to do it before it starts putting new growth into the buds and the buds start swelling because you don't want to waste energy in the tree. So if your buds are already swelling, if the new leaves are already coming out, it's probably too late, but maybe you still need to do it anyways. So you kind of weigh in your pros and cons there. My fruited plum tree in the house I just moved into is 30 feet tall. How do I prune down to size in a healthy way? Fruit trees are like weeds. These are probably one of the few trees that you can top and they will come back. That does not mean that they will produce fruit next year. They might need a few years to recover. That is a long answer. And I would say YouTube that. With the
I
one,
actually did that when I came back. It's making me reflect that if you've bought your house and you're going to rent it out, do not plant fruit trees,
Mhm.
would be my first advice.
Yeah.
So I did plant an apple tree and came back and mine was an apple and the pear, I think 30 feet tall. And I had the arborist come back 3 years in a row for 25%. And I got it down, but the root ball is still the same size. It still pumps
Yeah.
out a whole bunch of tree every year, but it's manageable now. It's down low. But I did take 3 years to do it.
Yeah. Fruit trees are aggressive growers. That's part of why they produce fruit. It's just part of their biology. And they are a lot of work to maintain. Some people find it to be immensely fun. Some people, it's a whole big chore. So if you don't want to have a big chore, don't plant them. But if you do, and it gets to be too much for you, hire an arborist. Like an arborist crew can take care of it in an hour or two. Like they got 3 guys that are in there. They know what they're doing. Yeah, because it can be a lot. Tree. I would also say if you're planting a fruit tree, make triple sure you know what size you are getting. There's mini dwarf, there's dwarf, there's half dwarf. They come in different sizes, and if you buy the wrong thing, you're going to have a monster tree. Tree condition. What are the rows of holes drilled in my street trees? It's a woodpecker. Is it bad? Not necessarily. So systematic rows of holes, that's a woodpecker. If you have random holes that follow no rhyme or reason, that could be an insect pest. That will also be accompanied with frass, which is sawdust and insect excrement. And it is either light brown or reddish brown, and you'll see it like on the tree. If you don't see that, probably not an insect pest. What is the fluffy white stuff on my trees? Is it bad? This could be one of 2 things. It could be lichen, which is perfectly fine. We live in the Northwest. That's just going to happen. If it bothers you, you can pick it off, but it's not bothering the tree.
Actually beneficial for the tree in some cases. Like I had, I thought that some lichen were beneficial for the trees, especially oak trees.
Some lichen could be.
Yeah. Okay.
I haven't looked into it too deeply other than it does not harm the tree because it's growing on the bark and not in the wood. So a parasite like mistletoe is growing into the wood and the cambium in the sap layer. Cambium is the sap layer. So that's parasite, whereas the lichen is growing on the surface of the tree, which is fine. If they're talking about fluffy white stuff on an apple tree, that is woolly aphids, and they are awful. Turn up your hose as high as it will go and blast them. I would not apply a pesticide to those because it's not going to work. But the hose, that works great. What time of year should I prune my cedar tree? So there's a joke among arborists. The best time to prune your tree is when your saw is sharp. The best time to prune your trees is usually in the winter, but it is better to make a good pruning cut at the worst time of year than to make a bad pruning cut at the best time of year. So generally, most trees want to be pruned in the winter. There are a few exceptions based on species, but you can prune a tree in the summer if you have someone who knows what they're doing and does a good job. Generally, I would say don't prune during summer. Some arborists will even say, no, we're not going to do that, but it depends on how much they need the work. Pruning during a heat wave can be pretty bad for your trees, depending on how much you're removing. If it's just taking off a branch for sidewalk clearance, that's fine. Do established trees need water? I used to say no. The answer is now yes. We are getting more heat waves than we used to. And we have some tree species that are quite water sensitive. red cedar, western hemlock. Katsuras are kind of water sensitive. I mean, generally an established tree does not need water, but if it is in an irrigated landscape where it grew up getting regular water, it probably needs water. And if you're having a big heat wave, it might be good to give your established trees a soak, either right before or right after the heat wave. Even that evening after the heat wave can save a tree. But generally, it's only your new trees that you need to water pretty consistently until they're established, unless it's a heat wave. And that also depends on the tree. Certain trees are really drought tolerant, and I would not water them. I'm not going to start listing trees. You should contact an arborist to advise you on that. Or you can look it up on the internet. A lot of the stuff, particularly for trees that are sold at nurseries, is very well known, and it'll list on there if it's drought and heat tolerant. But if you have a red cedar, definitely water that guy in the summer. Those guys are dying quickly. More trees. Why does DuPont have so many trees? The short version is it was forested here before it was developed. That's probably the biggest answer. I think the second part is we have a lot of street trees because Weyerhaeuser donated them.
Actually, it was part of a neo-urban design and streetscape, so it's very intentional that we're a treed city with our, I don't know what you would call our linear forest running through the city. So it was very intentional, and I hope it's a continued part of our plan.
How do we get more trees in bare areas? Example, the field by City Hall, the land near the old fort site, and up near Patriots Landing. So if it's not your property, don't plant a tree there. That's considered vandalism. You could talk with whoever does own the property. And I will also say certain areas, their natural ecosystem is more of a field as opposed to a forest. So it might not be appropriate to plant trees there. Depending. So like Gary Oak savannas is pretty much just grass and oak trees and maybe a Douglas fir. They're savannas. That's just how they grow. So just because it's bare doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with it.
Yeah, and I will add that the city has, if vacant land becomes developed, in the development process, there are requirements for the developer to do landscaping and plant trees. So that's one way if property develops where you would see more trees in a vacant area.
And there's one question related to that I'm going to get right now. Can I plant trees in open space if I want to? No, that's vandalism, actually. If it's not your property, don't plant it there. I'd also say if there's a bare spot that could have trees and historically did have trees, there's probably latent seeds in the ground and it will start growing on its own. But that's a whole nother topic. If I want to add a tree near my house, how close can I plant it to the house? That's up to you. Generally, I do not like to do it too close to the house unless it's a tree that is a small tree that can be planted close to a house. But I will say, trees do not damage foundations. They make damaged foundations worse. So stop blaming trees. But big trees like a big oak or a Douglas fir, I would plant further than 10 feet away from your house and maybe further depending on your yard. If you're unsure, I would ask an arborist, have them come to your house and recommend where the best planting spot is. If you've got small vine maples, hinoki cypresses, you can plant those closer to your house. Dwarf trees, but don't plant them underneath the awning. And don't plant them right where your gutter comes down.
Or power lines.
Yes, or your drop line. Don't plant it right underneath your drop line. But the awning is a big one. I actually see a lot of people plant trees right under their awning, and it grows right up into the awning. Plant it 2 feet out at the minimum. Why are trees all the same for each street? Wouldn't more variety be better? We do have a lot of streets here that have the same tree down the street. Some of that is a design choice, because it does look nice seeing a bunch of the same trees all in a row. It's a design choice. Really, variety is better for disease management. But if you don't have a disease for that tree here, it's just a design choice. I personally I can appreciate all the same tree, but I like variety for my personal style. I think there are cities like Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where they do not allow people to plant the same tree from house to house. And it is because they got hit really hard by several diseases that just wiped out most of their street trees. And they found that the street trees were actually a pathway for the insect. So that was emerald ash borer and Dutch elm disease. So they have a very strict, you cannot plant the same tree next to your neighbor policy. But we really don't have anything that would be too bad. And really, even the stretches of trees that we do have only go so far, and then it's a different tree. So yeah, variety is good. And I think that is all of the questions that we had, unless other people here in the room have questions.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. We do have two people here. Did either of you want to get up and ask a question? Okay, you just there is a microphone right there. Just turn that button on, you'll see the green light. Do you see the?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Patrick Connolly. I live here on Huggins Street. One question is, if you plant a tree, a street tree, and let's say that the street tree, the width is 4.5 feet, does it make sense to put some kind of restriction to prevent the roots from going out onto the grass and competing with the grass? Isn't that the previous tree was removed because the roots actually did that? The tree was probably not for that space. It was probably way too big for the space. The roots went out and competed with the lawn to the point where it was completely impractical to have a lawn. So what's the answer to that? Supposing you plant the right tree, and it's okay for that width. Is it advisable? Is it something that's done to put some kind of a restriction for the width of the tree? For the roots?
Yes. So is that, I know it is common practice to do root barrier between the tree and the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Is that what you're getting at, or is it a different kind of barrier?
A barrier like that, yes, to prevent it from going into the lawn area, yeah.
I've not seen that done. I know that it could be done.
So I guess another way to express my question is if I get the right tree for that 4.5 foot wide planter parking strip, is it reasonable to expect that it's not going to go and invade have invasive roots that are going to suck up all the water in the lawn?
I think if you get the right tree, those roots will grow deeper than the grass roots, and there'll be less competition. So you would want trees that don't have surface roots, but their roots grow a little deeper. So red maples and sweet gums, those are kind of the worst offenders for having large surface roots that mess up sidewalks and lawns. The other way that you can deal with that is when the tree is being planted, so say it's a new tree and you water it using something like a soaker hose where you're using
Oh, yeah.
less water for a longer period of time so that it really goes down deep into the soil, that's going to encourage the roots to grow down
Okay.
deeper. Whereas if you just water a bunch real quickly, you're going to get a lot of roots up near the surface because the water just stayed at the surface and never got a chance to go down in the
Oh,
soil.
right, right. And I
The
got a
way-
related question is, if the soil is kind of clay soil, should the hole for the tree be bigger and have, you know, good soil so that the tree is not stuck with just clay soil, you know?
As long as the soil is not compacted, I would say no. The clay soil shouldn't make too big of a difference. I have seen clay soil, particularly if it's shady, really mess up a lawn. But for the tree, it shouldn't make a difference.
Okay, great.
But if it is compacted, yeah, you're going to probably have a lot of surface roots. Some arborists offer pneumatic excavation with an air compressor, and they can decompact the soil.
Oh,
So if you do have really compacted soil, you can use an air spade to help with that. And even if it's an established tree, obviously they're not going to do all the soil, but they can do, it's called radial trenching with that to create some more good rooting space for the tree.
okay.
Where was your house at again? Are you in Palisades Village or Hoffman Hill or
It's on Huggins Street, which is right close to the park, Clock Tower Park.
Clock Tower? So most of the trees in our area, so I live in the same area, are actually in compacted. And they're just little buckets that were bored out, and the trees were supposed to stay in those buckets. And what happened, I think, is the roots came out over the top. When we came up with our recommended tree list, we tried to make sure that we only, so that's where I would look if you were choosing a tree, to not let that happen. And the one we've had the best luck with actually is the hornbeam, which is, really stays in its zone and doesn't reach out. But we tried to be very conscious of that because a lot of the area around here is compacted. And as James would know, you know, how you plant the tree and what's around it. Like I was reading something where if you put, I want to say it's gravel, sand, it'll trim the roots down. There's different ways you can put them in the ground, and we did not do that in the first stage of the city as we were building. We went with buckets bored out of this just terribly complex, like underneath your grass is compacted soil. Compacted, what is it?
Clay,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
which getting some decompaction could help the grass as well too. But if you were just replacing the tree in a really small spot, I really like the American hop hornbeam. It seems to like crowded spaces. Its roots, I mean.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, compacted soil is tough to deal with.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming and asking that question. How exciting. Is there anybody online?
We have one person, but Heidi, do you have another question for us?
No, thank you. I appreciate the answer that I got.
I'll add in one for free just because it's one I see around town a lot. On linden trees, frequently they have a pest, green aphids, that drop honeydew onto the ground. It's just a pest that tree tends to deal with. I think the silver linden is a little bit resistant to it, whereas the ones that we have are not. It's not too difficult to deal with though. It doesn't really damage anything other than just being a nuisance. So You can take your hose and blast them off. You can hire an arborist to treat it with an insecticide, which I don't really recommend because bees love linden trees. But the easiest thing to do is there are common predator insects that you can get, and I think even Fred Meyer carries them. So ladybugs will eat the heck out of those lindens, green lacewings. Some arborists even, they don't use chemicals, they just use the predator insects. The other way that you can minimize your tree getting an insect pest like aphids is just to keep it healthy. So a tree that's not stressed will generally shrug off most insects on its own.
Would you order, so when you order in your ladybugs, it's like you'd order them right when the
Yeah, while
aphids
the
are
aphids
coming?
are there,
Okay, to keep them.
because there will be several generations of aphids in one
Okay.
summer. Um,
And the cobweb moths or whatever those are that end up
the
as,
tent caterpillars,
yeah.
tent caterpillars don't normally cause much of an issue. So unless it's like all over your tree, if it's just like one or two patches, I wouldn't do anything because that's a native bug. And
So
it's
is it beneficial as well? I've been
Uh,
cutting them down. I can feel terrible.
I mean, it can be unsightly, so I wouldn't fault anybody for cutting it off. But unless it's just out of control and it's all over your tree, it's generally not an issue. Trying to think what the other big one here is. Bronze birch borer. If your birch tree is dying, it's probably got bronze birch borer. That's one you have to treat ahead of time or it's too late. So at that point, I enjoy your birch tree until it dies and then replace it with not a birch tree. Yeah, if you see birch trees dying from the tips back, that's probably it. That's just a thing that's in our area. You can't really do anything about it. Sorry if I burst anybody's bubble there. River birch is resistant to it though. So if you love birch trees, plant a river birch.
Well, thank you so much for your knowledge. We really appreciate it.
Great. So unless there's anything that anyone had to add, either commissioners or not before we adjourn, is there anything? Nope. I just had one thing to kind of add to the meeting is I was notified that our Tree City USA is due
It's due.
December 1st.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah.
We have our event now. Yeah. So yeah. All right. We will go ahead and adjourn tonight's meeting. Thank you, Commissioner Pasley, for all of your tree knowledge and answering all of those questions. So that was a really great event. I feel like it helped all of us become a lot more knowledgeable.
Thank you.